You can't catch me. I'm Tony the Tram.
Hello and welcome back to Buggles Kelly Station, and welcome to part 2 of my Seaside model railway build. In part 1 we looked at planning the layout and building the baseboards, and I got the standard gauge track fixed down. Now in part 2 I want to move on to the narrow gauge track, because it's going to be TT120 and TT120 narrow gauge, which will be interesting. But before I can do that, I've got to finish all the electrics, the point motors, switches, DCC stuff. It's only 2 wires, isn't it? The first job was to finish laying the rest of the standard gauge track in these sidings. This was done the same way as before, with the dropper wires soldered onto the bottom of each rail, and then these wires were threaded down under the baseboard. I'm using the Pico twist lock motors for this build. I already drilled the holes that are required before I put the points in place, because you need to drill down through the top of the board. And these motors simply clip into place, and the metal bar pokes up through the points, and then you mark the position with a pen and cut the height of the bar down using a Dremel. The point motors all come pre-wired, so I put these wires into little bags just to keep them out of the way while I fit the bus wire. The bus wire is what powers all of the track, and this runs from the NCE power cab socket, which needs to be mounted onto the outside of the layout. To do this, I marked the space needed and drilled a few holes, and then using a jigsaw I cut out the gap for the panel to fit onto. This panel is where the controller and the external power plug into the system, and it's where the bus wire comes from to power the track. I didn't realise at this stage that I'd actually screwed the panel on upside down. I didn't notice until I tried to plug the controller into the side that the instructions said, and it turns out it wasn't the correct side. The bus wire is a thicker gauge wire than the dropper wires, and what I've done is attached it onto the underside of the board with little self-adhesive plastic wire clips, and then for each point where it meets the dropper wires I've used these Wago connectors, the little 3-way ice cream van. Oh, where were we? And then for each point where it meets the dropper wires I've used these Wago connectors, the little 3-way inputs for each dropper wire to join the bus and carry on. So the track's all now connected to the bus, and I'm moving on to wiring up the point motors. I've decided to not control these with DCC, but rather use the old-fashioned point switches, so I'm wiring them up the traditional analogue way, using a separate 16-volt AC power supply. The solenoid motors work on a short burst of power, so I've fitted this capacity discharge unit to ensure there's power stored up ready every time. Now, coming out of the CDU are a blue and yellow wire. The yellow wire is the common return, so it works a bit like the bus wire, but basically all of the green wires from each motor connect up to this yellow wire. I've made a little bank of switches to attach to the front of the baseboard, and each switch is linked by the blue wire back to the CDU. Then each of the point motors' red and black wires feed into the switches, and we've got a complete circuit. Power comes in through the yellow wire, the switch is flipped, and then either the black or red wire makes contact, moving the point in either direction. The points are unifrog, which means there's a small metal section in the centre isolated from the rest of the points. This is called the frog. It's important to power the frog, or smaller wheelbase locos they will stop on it, as I keep finding. So to do this, I've attached an AE frog power controller to each point. These instantly switch the polarity of the frog to whatever it needs to be. The frog wire is already attached to the point, and this goes into the F terminal, and then I've added white and purple wires to each of the other sides, which join up to our existing bus wires. DCC is just 2 wires. The last thing to do is to fit the 2 motors that will be hidden at the back of the layout. I'm putting these as surface mounted point motors because there's not as much room underneath because the track is so close to the edge of the board. But they fit in exactly the same way, and they're all wired up the same as the other point motors. So I think I've done it correctly, but as I say, DCC is completely new to me. I've done this based on watching other people's videos and talking to friends who model DCC. So before I plug it in and blow something up, I thought I'd give Steve a ring. Steve, the British Columbian Railway model. I can't remember what he's called this week. But yeah, see what he thinks before I press the switch. Switch? Button.
Hello, Big Bear.
Hello, Mama Bear. Don't read too much into that. Steve, so I was hoping you might be able to have a look at the wiring I've done, please, just so I don't end up killing myself. The thing that I wasn't 100% sure on, I haven't finished yet, but when I get back to the end here, do I just need to... I don't join it back up again, do I?
No, you don't have to, because your power bus doesn't need to be a circle. It's an end-to-end line, as it were. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And some people put a snubber on to finish it. You don't have to. You absolutely don't have to. And in fact, on smaller layouts, they don't even particularly recommend it. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
But I would just connect them to the last 2 feeds in the line.
Right.
And use that as your termination.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. With the electrics now all working nicely, I can move on to the narrow gauge section. For this, I'm going to use a 6mm ply base so it doesn't add too much weight. I know it's going to come out as far as the sidings on the lower level, but to mark out the shape more easily, I've made a paper template of the board area. This is then copied onto the plywood. The upper section is very limited in depth because of the sidings in front, so I'm testing with the Z gauge track as I go along just to make sure it's not too tight. Because Flex Track has a mind of its own until it's fixed down, I've found that using flexible foam tape really helps to mark out the track bed. I've also clearly marked out the section that needs to be removed for the bridge, and now the board can be cut out with a jigsaw.
I just wanted to say thank you to all my Patreon supporters who will have got to see this video early. If you want to join Patreon, you can find a link in the description below. Cheers!
I've decided to sit the upper board a bit higher than I did on the plan, just so it's easier for me to get my hand underneath if we have any derailments. So I've made some supports from 90mm wide softwood. Now I need to work out how we're doing the narrow gauge track. So the standard gauge track is obviously the TT120 track with a gauge of 12mm, and then to represent narrow gauge I want to use Z gauge track. So that is a gauge of 6.5mm. This is made by Pico, some Z gauge flex track. Now I did a conversion from basically what that would be in real life. 6.5mm in 1:120 scale comes out at 780mm or about 2'6". So that's a fairly standard narrow gauge for certain places around the world. There's a few in the UK, sort of older military railways. Some places like Statfold Barn runs some bits at 2'6" or around there. It's sort of close enough. It's very close to Glidden Valley Tramway. I can't remember if it's slightly off 2'6", but yeah, it should work for narrow gauge. Now I had thought of basically taking out every other sleeper and spacing the sleepers out so it looks more like narrow gauge track. I passed that by a few friends of mine who happened to be narrow gauge experts, and was quickly told how terrible that would look, which I do agree with. So yeah, I wanted to see if there was any sleepers available that are in TTe scale, which is what this works out to be, TT narrow gauge basically. And there's not a lot. I did have a Google. There are some sleepers made by Bush, which I think is a German company. They look suitable. So it turns out there aren't any UK suppliers that have this track in stock. So, right. Darling, I'm just gonna head out. I may be some time.
Did you say something?
Yeah. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. No, I was speaking to the Hamburg police for like 20 minutes before I spoke to you, so yeah, George knew the risks, but yeah. Hopefully by Christmas, you know what they're like. It's his own fault anyway. Yeah. Anyway, I better go because I'm just recording a video at the minute, so. Alright, yeah. Cheers, Sam. Bye. So yeah, had fun in Hamburg, but they didn't have any of the track in stock, which was a bit irritating, but I did manage to find a website that was willing to post to the UK, so I've got some on order. Probably should have done that in the first place really, because it ended up being quite expensive. Well, yeah, so it shows you in the image here, basically I need to take the existing sleepers off the track and then fit some of these on. There's only actually 80 centimetres in a pack. I've got 3 packs in total. So I don't know if I'll have enough to do the full section, but as long as I get the scenic section done, I can worry about that later. Now I imagine it probably would have been cheaper to buy just the rails. But when I bought the track, I had thought maybe I'd just take every other sleeper out. And you can see the difference here at the bottom. So this is the Z gauge, well, Z gauge and TTe, so Z gauge track but with bigger sleepers, and I think it looks a lot better. So I laid the narrow gauge track the same way that I had the standard gauge, but unlike the Pico sleepers, this Bush stuff seems to be quite a lot harder, and I got through so many of the little track pins. I didn't end up filming much of this because it probably took me about 4 hours just to lay this tiny loop of track. Here's a few highlights for you. For fuck's sake. Ow. Nails. So I spent a bit of time looking at Z gauge chassis to use, and they're all very expensive, to be honest, for what I need it for. Apart from this, which I found, which is the Rokuhan Shorty, so this is from Japan. and this is literally just the chassis, but it's designed to be able to work on very tight radius curves. And the nice thing about these as well, apart from the really tight radius curve, is they're only about £15. So what I wanted to do was design a loco chassis to fit onto this, and spent a bit of time and a few modifications, and then I finally come out with this narrow gauge tram, which is based on the J70 tram. I'm calling it Tony the Tram Engine.
Hey, bro.
So this is, as you can see, this has just got the Rokuhan chassis inside, and those wheels can turn quite freely. What I've had to do is remove the couplers off each end and trim a little bit of it down, but I think it works quite nicely.
You can't catch me. I'm Tony the Tram.
So thank you for watching, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm really pleased to get the electrics out of the way so I can move on to more scenic bits soon. But yeah, it is good fun having a working tramway in TT120 narrow gauge. If that's something you think you might be interested in, I know it's a bit niche, but I'm thinking I might add the tram as a kit onto the website, so leave a comment below if you think that's something you might like to see. And yeah, I will see you again in the next episode, where I hope to move on to some landscaping and look at where things are going to go, like the roads and the water and stuff like that, and try and plan it all out a bit. But yeah, until next time, thanks for watching, and see you again soon. Bye. Yeah. Ow. Fucking nails.